People always said I had the calm of a man who'd seen too many storms to be rattled by clouds. Maybe that was true once. But I've learned that the worst storms don't roll in from the sea, they come from the people you trust. My name is Garrett Stone. I'm 45 years old. I run Stone Maritime Logistics, the biggest name in Caribbean freight shipping. I live in Coral Gables, Florida, just outside Miami. I have 3 cargo ports under my name and half the harbor masters and the keys on speed dial. What I didn't have was peace. My wife, Layla, had started changing. It wasn't one big thing. It was all small shifts that didn't make sense together. More time away. Trips she swore were for art brokerage opportunities, though the art gallery she always mentioned, a woman named Marta Vega's place in Wynwood, hadn't posted on social media in almost a month. Marta's doing a digital detox, Layla had said, brushing it off. But Marta was one of those people who lived to post their croissants, so that didn't track. Then came the business dinners. Off-season, in strange places. Half the time, she didn't even remember which city she was supposed to be in. I'd ask, how was Sarasota? And she'd blink twice before saying, oh, right, Sarasota was lovely. That kind of thing. The final straw came on a Sunday morning. Layla had forgotten to take her work phone with her. It buzzed on the kitchen counter. I didn't read any messages. I didn't need to. What caught my attention was the calendar. There were no gallery appointments. Instead, just one recurring event every Friday afternoon labeled Dockside Review. I knew every marina from West Palm to Havana. Dockside Review wasn't art. So I made a decision. Quiet, deliberate. I installed a GPS tracker in the rear wheel well of her company car. Layla drove a leased silver Range Rover, paid for through her LLC. She left town again the following Friday, claiming she had a client in Key Largo. I watched her location move on my screen. It didn't go to Key Largo. She drove south past Homestead, then east, winding into a marina tucked along Old Cutler Road. She parked near a private dock reserved for a luxury yacht brokerage firm, Gideon Marine Holdings. I knew them. They rented high-end crafts to rich tourists and shady developers with just enough money to stay above the law. The yacht Layla approached had a name painted in black script along the stern, the Seraphine. That night, I made a call I hadn't made in years. A secure line. Old habit. I waited for the pickup. Garrett, came the voice, low and even. Didn't think I'd hear from you unless it was war. Maybe it is, I replied. Marcus Trent, former Navy intelligence. We served together on the USS Stennis during my darker years. I need eyes, I said. Discreet ones. Layla. Yeah. He didn't ask anything else. Just said, send me the data. I sent him the GPS logs. And then I waited. That was when I knew, whatever this was, it went deeper than a few gallery lies. I wasn't just being lied to. I was being handled. And the worst part? I didn't know by how many people. Not yet. 3 days after I sent Marcus the GPS data, I got an encrypted message through our old comms system, a relic from the days when both of us wore uniforms instead of suits. You were right. This rabbit hole's deep. Sending package via secure courier. Eyes only. I sat in my office, staring at the message, heart thudding slower than it should have. I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed. There's a difference. When the package arrived the next day, I locked my office door, lowered the blinds, and opened the slim black folder with the precision of a man disarming a mine. Inside, account printouts, transfer histories, shell company directories, yacht dock manifests, all cross-referenced, all damning. Layla had funneled over $400,000 from our joint accounts into a web of offshore companies, Belize, Seychelles, even a holding firm in Liechtenstein. She'd set them up through aliases, but not one's clever enough to fool someone like Marcus. One entity, called ArtVest Global, had no art behind it. No clients. No gallery. Then there were the fake invoices, 3 high-value art pieces supposedly sold to private European collectors. Except Lydia, another old contact of mine and a forensic accountant who owed me a favor, ran the names through every database from here to Amsterdam. Those transactions never existed. The money didn't go to collectors. It was laundered into yacht shares and shell real estate companies. One name came up again and again. Calvin Stroud. Luxury developer. Maritime consultant. Fraud artist with a tan and a LinkedIn full of buzzwords. I remembered him from a Miami gala 5 years back. He was trying to get rich retirees to invest in floating condos, literal cruise ships converted into gated communities at sea. His pitch was all charm, no math. And Layla had laughed him off at the time. Or at least, I thought she had. Turns out, she'd stayed in touch. Lydia traced 3 of the largest deposits from Artvest Global to a dummy company in the Caymans called Blue Horizon Projects. Guess who sat on the board? Stroud. Along with 2 men I recognized from Caribbean customs watch lists. Smugglers, not developers. Marcus added one more detail. Every time the Seraphine docked near Miami or Isla Morada, Layla's car was less than 100 feet away. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. One that lined up perfectly with the days she claimed she was with Marta in Wynwood or setting up a gallery event in Boca. I didn't say a word to her. Not that night. Not the next. I watched her instead, how she smiled while stirring coffee, how she offered to set up a joint account for our future renovations, how she kissed my cheek like she hadn't just gutted our finances behind my back. Inside, I felt nothing. No rage. Just the familiar hum of calculation. A cold clarity I hadn't used since the Navy. I was being played by someone who thought they'd already won. And if there's one thing I learned from a lifetime on the water, the current always shifts. 2 weeks after I read the reports, Layla invited me to dinner like nothing had changed. She wore a navy silk dress I'd never seen before, tight at the waist, loose at the shoulders, the kind that said, "I'm still the woman you married." She greeted me with wine in hand, soft jazz playing through the yacht speakers. Our yacht, Maribel, not the Seraphine. That one was still tucked behind a private dock, too far away for prying eyes, too close for comfort. "I thought we deserved a night away," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "Just us. No gallery talk. No business." I nodded, playing my role. "You've been tense lately," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I miss us." Us. That word landed like a paperweight. The yacht swayed gently as she guided me to the deck dining table. Filet mignon, fresh asparagus, scalloped potatoes, and a small folder sitting by my plate, sleek, white, discreet. "What's this?" I asked casually, swirling my wine. She smiled, eyes bright. "Just something I want you to look at. It's a pre-approval proposal for that expansion idea we talked about. The mixed-use warehouse investment." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you were interested in the shipping side of things." She laughed, light and sweet. "Not the shipping, Garrett. The property. Logistics hubs are real estate gold. We could co-sign, open a new LLC. It'd protect us. Diversify us." I flipped the folder open and skimmed the first page. Looked standard. Legal boilerplate. But halfway down the second sheet, in 6-point font, was a clause that would transfer controlling shares of our primary holdings, my primary holdings, into a new account. The signature line was already highlighted. I looked up slowly. "You really want us to co-sign?" Layla reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "This could be the next chapter for us. I've been thinking, maybe a move. Europe, maybe. Or the Caribbean. Start fresh. Simplify. Simplify. After laundering $500,000 through a shelf firm and cozying up to a maritime criminal? Sure. Sounds simple." I leaned back, smiled like a man in love. "Sounds bold." She lit up. "So you'll consider it?" "Of course," I said, lifting my wine. "To bold moves." She clinked her glass to mine. "To us." As we ate, she talked about Santorini sunsets, learning Italian, even flipping beachfront properties in Belize, a full fantasy, spun like silk. And the whole time, I listened. I nodded. I made mental notes. Her tone was coaxing, but her eyes kept flicking toward the folder like she was counting down to the part where I'd scribble my name and hand her the keys to everything. But I didn't sign. Instead, I asked about logistics. Would the joint venture be in both our names? Where would funds transfer first? Do we loop in outside investors? She answered everything like she had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. I checked my watch. I made sure my phone, tucked in my blazer, was recording audio. When the plates were cleared and the night settled into silence, she leaned in and said, "Maybe tonight's a good night to take a leap, Garrett." I met her gaze. Calm. Measured. "Maybe. But let's sleep on it." She hid her disappointment well. Not perfectly. Back in the harbor, as I tied off Maribel, I saw her reflection in the window, watching me. That night, I didn't sleep. I reread the proposal under a magnifier, exported the audio file to my secure drive, and tagged every word she said. The trap had been set, but not by her. The morning after our romantic dinner on Maribel, I made breakfast like nothing had happened. Eggs, toast, coffee, her usual. She walked in wearing one of my button-downs like she always did after a night she thought she controlled. "Smells good," she said, kissing my cheek. "Figured we'd start the day right," I said evenly. We ate in silence, save for the occasional fork against China. I waited until she stood to rinse her plate before I spoke. I looked over the paperwork, I said, sipping my coffee. She turned slightly, her eyes narrowing, just for a second. And, you almost had me, I said softly. She froze. The plate slipped slightly in her hand but didn't fall. She turned slowly. What are you talking about? I stood up and slid a manila folder across the counter. A twin to the one she gave me, except this one had attachments. Screenshots. Bank logs. Yacht schedules. Offshore account numbers. Layla stared at it like it was hissing. You should read it, I said. Might learn something about yourself. She didn't move. $432,000. Missing. Split into 7 offshore accounts, 3 of which are registered to shell entities traced back to you. Or to someone pretending to be named Cassidy Vale. I don't know what that is, she said sharply, her voice rising. I walked around the counter, slow and quiet. The Seraphine. It's registered under Blue Horizon Projects, whose board includes Calvin Stroud, the same man you accidentally ran into at that Coral Gables charity gala 2 months ago. Her face flushed. You're being paranoid. No, I said, my voice hardening. I'm being thorough. I pulled out a second document. This is a copy of your proposal, the one from last night, with your clever little clause buried on page 5. You didn't even bother masking it with a different font. Real rookie mistake, Layla. I didn't. Don't insult me. She slammed her hands down on the counter. You're twisting everything. That money was for investments for us. Calvin is a developer, a consultant. He's a conman with maritime fraud priors, I snapped. And you? You're about 1 step away from being indicted for wire fraud. She laughed bitterly, pushing her hair back. You really think threatening me is going to fix our marriage? There's no marriage left to fix, I said. There's a transaction. And I'm shutting it down. Her eyes flashed. If you come after me, I'll drag your name through the mud. I'll call the media. I'll say you abused me. I'll have a dozen people ready to back me up. I didn't blink. Then I'll give the FBI access to every encrypted file, every transaction, every GPS log. And the conversation we had last night? It's already backed up to a secure drive. You tried to get me to sign over my company under false pretenses. That's conspiracy to defraud. She clenched her jaw, but the fear was there now, thin and brittle under the anger. I slid one more paper across the counter. What's this? She asked, barely above a whisper. An agreement, I said. Sign it, and I won't pursue criminal charges. You'll return the funds, transfer all holdings back to their original ownership, and dissolve your shell companies within 30 days. In return, I walk away. Quietly. Layla didn't reach for it. Instead, she grabbed her phone and dialed. She didn't even step away from me. Calvin, she said, voice low and urgent. We have a problem. Of course she called him. Tell him if he wants to negotiate, I said. He can do it in person. She met my gaze, defiant again. He will. Good, I said. Because this house is wired. And I've already called my legal team. If he wants to walk into a trap, he's welcome to it. Layla didn't speak again. She walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway like she hadn't just watched her empire start to collapse. But I wasn't celebrating. I knew Calvin. And Calvin didn't show up unless he had something dangerous in his pocket. Calvin Stroud showed up 48 hours later, dressed like a man who wanted to look harmless, linen shirt, no tie, boat shoes, Rolex peeking just far enough out from under his cuff to remind you who paid for the meal. He stepped through the door like he'd been here before. Layla followed close behind, chin high, that same mask of practiced composure stretched tight across her face. But this time, it didn't hold as well. Garrett, Calvin said, offering a grin that didn't reach his eyes. No need for hostility. We're all adults here. I didn't offer a handshake. Then act like one. Sit. We gathered in the great room. I had cleared the coffee table of everything but 2 glasses and a decanter of scotch. The cameras I'd had installed earlier were tucked discreetly in the corners, live streaming to a cloud server Marcus helped me set up. I poured us all drinks. Not because I wanted to, but because Calvin struck me as the kind of man who relaxed more when he thought he was winning. To new beginnings, he said, lifting his glass. I didn't move. To restitution. He laughed once, a small snort of amusement. Ah, so that's where this is going. Layla sat next to him, legs crossed, jaw clenched. She hadn't said a word since walking in. I placed a thin folder on the table between us. Every document, every offshore transfer, every backdated art sale that never happened. You're looking at federal time, both of you. But I'm offering a door out. Clean. Quiet. You sign over every asset and return what you stole. I don't press charges. Calvin leaned forward, scanning the top page. You're bluffing. I'm not. I said, my tone flat. And if you needed more proof. I pressed a button on my phone. The room filled with Layla's voice, from our dinner on Maribel. We could co-sign. Move abroad. No one would ever find us. Calvin froze. Layla's face dropped. I pressed pause. You recorded us? She hissed. Of course I did. Calvin sat back, smile gone. The money's already tied up. Liquid assets. You can't just undo that. Then get creative, I said. Because I'm not walking away without every cent and every deed. He stood suddenly, chest puffed, pacing. You think you're untouchable? You think just because you've got a little Navy background and a few buddies with binoculars you can scare me? No, I said, standing too. I think because I've got leverage. Real leverage. Not a yacht and a fake investment plan. He looked to Layla, who still hadn't moved. Then she did something stupid. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small Glock 43. Her hand shook slightly, but she leveled it right at my chest. I'm done playing, she said. Sign over the evidence and walk away. Or I swear. Click. She pulled the trigger. Nothing. Calvin spun toward her. What the hell are you doing? I didn't flinch. Safety was off. Magazine was empty. You should check your purse more often. Then I moved. I reached across the table and slapped the gun from her hand. She shrieked as it skidded across the hardwood floor. Calvin lunged for it and knocked over the scotch bottle in the process. He grabbed a boat flare from his coat. Why he had one, I don't know. Probably thought it made him look like a pirate. He lit it, wild and blind, waving it like a lunatic. Back off, he shouted, flame roaring bright. But I didn't need to get closer, because my private security, Lydia's team, was already en route. Calvin kicked over the coffee table, grabbed Layla by the wrist, and bolted for the front door. They made it to the driveway before the alarms triggered. And by then, they were exactly where I wanted them, running. Because when people run, they leave footprints. And I was already 3 steps ahead. Layla and Calvin thought they were ghosts. Untouchable. Drifting across borders and coastlines like the world owed them privacy. But I didn't build an empire by letting people slip through the cracks. They vanished off the grid for 3 days. Then Marcus pinged me. Remote marina. Grand Bahama. Coordinates sent. They're trying to pull funds from offshore. I sat alone in my office, the lights low, laptop open, surveillance feed streaming grainy footage from a dockside camera. There they were, Layla in oversized sunglasses and a windbreaker, Calvin wearing a fishing hat like a bad disguise. Hunched over a satellite rig hooked to a laptop, scrambling to move money they thought I hadn't found yet. But I had. Every shell, every alias, every last cent. They initiated a transfer to an anonymous crypto wallet. One final trick. One last sleight of hand. They entered the 2-factor authentication. They waited. Nothing happened. Layla checked the laptop screen again. Tapped the keyboard. Looked around, confused. Then her phone buzzed. She answered without hesitation. Garrett, she said, voice sharp. We need the access code. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow sip of coffee, and stared at the screen. You're standing on dock 12? I said calmly. Gray fishing boat behind you, engine still warm. 3 vehicles in the lot. None registered under your names. The silence on her end was immediate. Thick. Heavy. I continued. There's a Coast Guard cutter 2 nautical miles east. My call to them went out 12 minutes ago. Garrett, please, she started, panic creeping into her voice. I cut her off. You made a choice, Layla. Then, before she could pivot to tears or threats, I ended the call. Seconds later, I watched the moment they realized they were done. Calvin stood, flailing his arms at the dock like a man calculating how far he could swim before hypothermia hit. Layla froze, her mouth forming a silent curse. Then the sirens echoed across the harbor. 2 patrol boats cut through the channel. Coast Guard uniforms moved fast, no hesitation. They didn't even need to draw weapons. Calvin raised his hands immediately. Layla tried to toss the phone into the water, but one of the officers caught her wrist before it left her fingers. They were cuffed within 30 seconds. Hauled aboard separate vessels. I watched until the feed went dark. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. It was Marcus. Transfer attempt blocked. Funds recovered. Digital footprint logged. Also, Coast Guard picked up encrypted hard drives. Stroud's prints are all over them. Good. Let him try and talk his way out of that. I sat in the stillness of my home, No music. No wine. Just quiet. She had tried to sell me the dream of a new life, just the two of us, in some coastal villa with no baggage. But her real plan had always been the same. Cash, vanish, and leave me with the cleanup. Now she'd have plenty of time to think about it. In a concrete cell, wearing orange. Before bed, I reopened the surveillance footage. Paused on one frame. Layla, looking straight into the camera, eyes wide. Betrayal caught in real time. I stared at it for a while. Then I deleted it. Because I didn't need to watch her fall again. I had already won. Federal arraignment hearings aren't like courtroom dramas on TV. There's no shouting. No dramatic confessions in the final 5 minutes. Just the dull hum of paper shuffling, murmured objections, and the quiet sound of lives coming undone. Calvin Stroud sat at the defense table looking like a washed-up finance bro who'd finally read the fine print. His tan had faded. His hair wasn't slicked back anymore. It was thinning, messy. Reality had caught up to him, and it showed. Layla sat beside her lawyer. No makeup, hair pulled back, beige suit 2 sizes too large. She looked small, but her eyes scanned the courtroom like she was still working an angle. Calvin was first to fold. He cut a deal almost immediately. The plea agreement hit my desk 2 days before the hearing. He offered up digital records, offshore links, and internal emails that implicated Layla in every aspect of the fraud. Not just an accessory. A co-architect. When they read the evidence aloud in court, Layla's face stayed neutral. Blank. But her hands trembled in her lap. I knew that tremble. I'd seen it once during a hurricane docking in Curacao when the wind cracked a steel bulkhead. Back then, she was afraid of dying. Now, she was afraid of being known. Her attorney pushed for dismissal of the conspiracy charges. Claimed she was manipulated, emotionally coerced, by Calvin. But the prosecution shredded that angle with one exhibit. The audio from our dinner on Maribel. Her voice, crystal clear, coaxing me to sign my empire away with a champagne smile. After the hearing, her attorney asked the judge for a private meeting between Layla and me. She has information, he said. She's willing to cooperate further. I agreed. Not out of curiosity, but to watch the last mask come off. They gave us a private room. Windowed, but soundproof. She walked in slow, hands clasped in front of her, the chain between her cuffs barely rattling. You look tired, I said. She gave a hollow smile. So do you. I waited. She sat, leaned forward. Her eyes locked on mine. I'm pregnant. There it was, the last card in her deck. Played with just enough tremble in her voice to make it feel like truth. I didn't flinch. You're not. Garrett. You had a Mirena coil inserted 14 months ago, I said, placing a copy of her medical intake form on the table. You forgot I still have access to your insurance portal. That was sloppy. She stared at the paper like it betrayed her. I leaned in. You're not pregnant, Layla. You're cornered. The act dissolved instantly. Her shoulders slumped. Her eyes burned with a cold hate I hadn't seen before. You think you've won, she whispered. I don't need to win, I said. I just need you to stop. She laughed once. Dry. I hope someday, Garrett, you get what's coming to you. Not for what you did, but for what you are. I stood slowly. That's the difference between us, Layla. You destroy everything you touch to protect your image. I protect what matters and walk away when I have to. I pressed the call button for the guard. She stood as he entered, but turned once before leaving. This isn't over. I didn't reply. Because it was. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I walked past them without a word. No statements. No interviews. Let the documents speak for themselves. By the end of the week, Calvin's full cooperation landed him 10 years in a federal facility. Layla's sentencing was still pending. But with conspiracy, fraud, and attempted coercion on her sheet, she was looking at 15 minimum. And I was finally free. But freedom comes with a strange silence. One that echoes. A silence I intended to fill. On my own terms. Freedom, I'd learned, didn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it came with the sound of a man gasping his last breath in a prison infirmary. It was 4 weeks after the hearings. I was sailing solo along the eastern edge of the Florida Keys, the water flat and shining like liquid steel, when the call came through my secure line. Marcus, as usual, didn't waste time on pleasantries. Calvin Stroud's dead, he said. I didn't respond right away. I let the wind fill the silence between us. Staged suicide, Marcus added. Bedsheet. Supposedly hung himself from a pipe. But that facility doesn't have exposed plumbing. It's sealed. My hand gripped the wheel of the boat a little tighter. So someone helped him along. Or made sure he wouldn't talk anymore. That changed everything. For weeks, I had assumed Layla was broken, caged, disarmed. But Calvin's death meant something else entirely. Someone else was still in play, someone who had resources, reach, and something to lose if Calvin kept talking. I knew who it was before Marcus said the name. "She's trying to clean up." "She's not just trying," he replied. "She's already started." That night, I dug into old records I'd hoped I'd never need. I cross-referenced burner phones, sat uplinks, and encrypted exchanges from a decade ago, back when I'd worked maritime intelligence off Guantanamo and Havana. One name came up in the chatter: Domino. Real name unknown. A shadow off the Cuban coast. Former SEAL-turned-mercenary. Specialized in waterside extractions and aquatic stealth hits. The kind of guy who'd kill someone in a boat bathroom and vanish before the engine cooled. Last seen working security detail for a shipping magnate in Cienfuegos. Before that, smuggling cartel daughters out of Venezuela in modified dive boats. Layla knew him. She'd sheltered him years ago, one of her gallery patrons, back when she was laundering favors as paintings. Marcus confirmed it. Domino had resurfaced. And Layla had made contact. "She's not just trying to disappear," Marcus said. "She's trying to erase you." I stood on the bow of the boat, wind tearing through my shirt, watching the water. That's when I triggered the Barracuda protocol. Back in the day, it was a ghost system, a defense net for shipping captains targeted by piracy. But I'd kept my access after retiring. Enhanced it. Paid the right hackers to keep the back door open. Now, with one command over an encrypted SATCOM uplink, I activated a dormant network of private maritime security systems across the Florida Straits and southern Cuba. Motion sensors. Facial recognition cameras. Patrol nodes. The sea may be open, but mine was watched. And 2 days later, it paid off. Domino was intercepted just off the coast of Marathon Key. He was posing as a dive instructor, but the name on his gear didn't match his passport, and the rifle in his waterproof case wasn't for fish. He didn't talk. He didn't need to. The moment the arrest hit the internal databases, Layla collapsed in her cell. "Panic attack," they said. "Hyperventilation." No one knew why, but I did. Because the moment Domino was caught, she knew the play had failed. I received a message that night from the U.S. Marshals liaison assigned to her case. Inmate Layla Stone has voluntarily submitted a full confession. Wire fraud, offshore laundering, conspiracy to commit homicide. I read the file at my desk, alone. 20 pages of truth she never intended to say aloud. She admitted to targeting me from the start, to using Calvin for connections, to hiring Domino through an encrypted proxy under a fake art consortium. She even tried to claim she panicked, that it was never meant to go that far. But by then, it already had. And I didn't lift a finger. No violence. No counterattack. Just a net she thought I'd forgotten how to cast. Turns out, the old sailor still knew the tides. And the storm? The storm was hers. 6 months later, the Caribbean was quiet again. No court hearings. No surveillance footage. No encrypted phone calls from former intel contacts. Just me, the ocean, and a rebuilt crew of the only people who had ever stood on my side without asking for anything in return. We were anchored off the north coast of St. Croix, Marcus, Lydia, and an old friend named Ray Delgado, a retired customs investigator who helped clear my name during the silent parts of Layla's trial. He had a crooked smile, a broken finger he never got fixed, and a love for black coffee so strong it could wake the dead. The four of us sat on the stern of my new yacht, the Oak Keeper. She was smaller than Maribel, sleeker, easier to sail without a full crew. The name wasn't subtle. But then again, nothing about my life had been for a long time. We weren't just here to drink rum and watch the sun bleed into the water. We were planning something new. Ever thought about running a maritime scholarship fund? Marcus asked, flipping through the proposal on his tablet. Already started one, I said, handing him a folder. Merchant mariner kids. Coast Guard veterans. 10 grants a year. He nodded, impressed. Guess some storms leave clean water behind. Lydia was reviewing numbers on a portable display. The trust you pulled from Layla's clawbacks? You could fund this for 10 years without lifting a finger. Then I'll fund it for 20, I said. Because some debts weren't about money. I'd already made quiet donations to the families affected by Calvin's dummy investments. 3 fishermen in Belize. 2 former cargo contractors in Nassau. They never knew where the money came from. I didn't need them to. At sunset, we clinked glasses, not to Layla, or Calvin, or even justice. To survival. To clarity. To walking away when the house is still on fire behind you. Later that night, alone on the upper deck, I sat with an old leather-bound journal. Pages worn from sea spray and time. Inside were names, coordinates, phone numbers, maps of places I'd visited during my Navy days, and more recently, during the unraveling of my marriage. One name was circled. Amira Stroud, Calvin's younger sister. She'd visited my old estate in Coral Gables a week ago. Left a sealed envelope with the caretaker. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in looping, careful script. Inside was a note. He wasn't always like that. Thank you for making sure his daughter will never need to know who he became. You did more than justice. You offered peace. There was also a small photo of a little girl, about 4 years old, grinning on a beach, clutching a seashell. I stared at the picture for a long time. Not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me that even in the worst people, there's a shard of someone worth saving. And sometimes, that shard lives on in someone else. I walked to the bow, the wind rising in my ears. Tugged my wedding ring off my finger. The gold was dulled now, the engraving on the inside almost worn smooth. I held it for a moment in my palm, then flicked it into the sea. It disappeared without a splash. Just vanished, like she had. Ray joined me a minute later, holding 2 mugs. Still warm, he said, handing me one. Future looks clearer when you're not looking over your shoulder. We stood there, quiet. Behind us, Marcus and Lydia were already sketching out the first training route for our pilot mentorship program, Caribbean Logistics, safety courses, port partnerships. You really doing this? Ray asked. Yeah, I said. I think it's time. The past was gone. The page was turned. In the ocean, it was mine again.